Welcome to the Managing People podcast, a place for people with curious minds. Hello, I'm Pete Fullard, and my guest this time was voted one of HR's most influential thinkers. She's a great speaker, a business coach, and is no stranger to winning awards. You'll hear she brings a lot of love to the podcast this time. After a career honing her skills, she formed her own consultancy specialising in inclusivity, and she and her team help organisations create a culture that allows everyone to thrive. Aggie Mutuma, welcome to the Managing People podcast.
Thank you, Pete. Happy to be here.
We're very delighted to have you on. Let's start with where your career began. Tell us the story from the beginning.
Sure. Gosh, the very, very beginning actually started in a fast food chain when I was at school, still doing my A-levels. And I mentioned that. I actually mentioned that because I think that was a really, really important intro for me into the world of work, relationships, almost that service piece as well, which I think, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on when we talk about leadership and actually everything I do now, that piece around service. And you're here to serve a customer, a client, and you're here to help them get their meal, obviously when I started, but now obviously you're helping them to gain their inclusive organizations. So started in a fast food chain, not the one with the big M's, the other one with a crown. So take from that what you will. And absolutely loved it actually. Then through uni, etc., again, stayed in retail. So again, that piece around service and working with people and helping to engage people. And as I was working in retail, I became a shop floor supervisor. Loved working with people. I hadn't really thought about HR or the people space before. A lot of the industries and professions I understood were the traditional ones that you see as a child. And but actually, when I was a supervisor, recruiting, training, etc., I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And that's where I became aware of the people profession. I was actually studying for my first degree engineering. Surprise, always surprises people. So like I said, developed a love for people, moved to head office for the organization I was working in at the time, the RKD Group, and then did a stint in customer service, again, back to that service piece again, a stint in customer services, then moved into HR.
Now, Aggie, I can't let it go by. You were doing an engineering degree. What was the original motivation behind that then, and what changed?
Well, you know me, Pete. So I am a very open person, and I also don't like to be pinned down to one thing. I'm quite open around doing different things. So the degree itself was a combined studies degree. So there was an element of a huge element of engineering. So that was the main piece. Then there was production, HR, marketing, a bit of IT as well within that. So it was a beautiful combined, lots of different things to explore. Then you can then narrow down. But the main piece was manufacturing systems engineering.
Wow. Yes. So that was a slight different change in direction.
The interesting thing about the degree, I still use it. Just in terms of design thinking. And when it comes to thinking about strategy and what we're doing and why, I always go back to some of those principles from that degree around why we're doing what we're doing, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve, then how do we then design, engineer backwards that strategy, design and engineer backwards that approach that we want to take. So, yeah.
That's fascinating how you link the two together. And what were the management styles that you encountered in the first few retailers that you worked with then?
Really interesting, because I think retail's beautiful in that it depends which part of retail you're working in, but then equally it depends on the person in front of you, doesn't it? So I experienced a variety. I experienced this beautiful leader who was just a lovely person, really, really lovely person, really engaging, really wanted to look after her team, and she did a great job at that. What she didn't do very well, however, was manage performance. So she struggled with the tough conversations. She struggled with addressing poor behaviour. And while I understand why she struggled with those, the impact that it had on the others who were performing, on the others who were showing up in the right way, was that actually they became disgruntled because they were seeing poor behaviour being allowed. So big learnings for me around that. I also had a leader who was great in terms of again, that engagement piece, but also was able to address poor behavior. He was quite uncomfortable with it. You could tell he was uncomfortable, but at least he addressed it, which was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So again, that was good learning. I also had interesting leaders, I'm going to call them. Let's just say they hadn't quite developed yet. So a couple of leaders who wanted to, or it felt like they wanted to own the work that their team did. As in, oh, look what I did. Did you though? So there was an interesting piece around that. And then a lot of leaders who hadn't yet found their authentic style, or weren't comfortable yet in their authentic style, in that depending who was in front of them, you'd almost see a different person. So yeah, lessons in all of those.
So that's fascinating. You were clearly studying management right from the get-go. What happened next in your career?
Right. So progressed in Arcadia. And I guess the how was, a lot of it was just showing up as myself, taking the learnings. And I think that point you made actually around, you didn't use this language, but making those connections as I'm learning, as I'm watching, as I'm always sort of soaking things in, soaking learning in and applying it to myself as well. I then progressed to a bigger role in a small airport retailer. Which was amazing because I'd gone from this huge organization where I guess I was a small fish, to use terminology or adages that we all know, small fish in a big pond, to a big fish in a tiny pond. And that was my first role really as a manager, managing a very small team. There were two, tiny team, but it was actually beautiful in that I was able to apply all my learning, apply all my knowledge from a leadership point of view in terms of leading a team. Who are we? What do we want to be? How do we want to serve? That service piece coming back. How do we want to serve our clients, our customers? And then that design thinking piece, again, around as an HR team, how do we want to impact this organization? What are the challenges that we're experiencing? And then how can we, as an HR team, solve those? So it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant experience. And I think the key things that I took from that, or to that first actually, were that piece around authentic leadership. Again, from my learnings in my previous organization. And also, I would say that piece around delivering bad news and being okay with doing that, but doing it with love. So love is a word I use a lot, but doing that with love and understanding that actually someone underperforming, they probably don't feel that great. They probably know that they're not hitting the mark right now and they're probably feeling quite concerned. But being able to say to the person, look, let's talk. Here are the expectations of your role that hopefully we've set at the beginning, so you know what they are already. How do you think things are going? What do you think is going well? What do you think is not going so well? In most cases, they'll highlight the things that you already knew. They know already too. So you can then say, well, I agree. These are the pieces that you're doing really brilliantly, and let's keep doing that. But here are the pieces where you need some help. What can I do to support you to bridge that gap? But actually, what are you going to do as well? So giving them that ownership, but also there's some ownership on your part as well. And making it an us problem that we're going to solve together, as opposed to where you're doing a terrible thing and you're bad at your job. So that's something that I took with me from that knowledge. And I applied it very quickly, actually, because when I joined the team, they had a different way of management, we'll just put it that way, previously. It was quite reactionary. It was old-fashioned HR, I'm going to call it, in that we come to HR when we've messed something up and we need them to fix it, or when something's going really wrong. Whereas my approach to HR is, it's strategic. You know, when you think about most organizations, the biggest spend on your balance sheet tends to be people, or your profit and loss, wherever you put your people spend, tends to be your people. So actually, how do we maximize? How do we engage? How do we bring to potential our people? I think is really crucial for businesses. So yeah, very quickly had to practice that piece around, here's the expectations, here's where we need to be, here's where we want to be as a team and why it's really important for the organization. We're not quite there yet, let's have the conversation. What else can I say about that? The piece around stakeholder management as well was really important. So working with my colleagues in operations and being really business savvy. And what I mean by that is not necessarily stepping into their shoes and running their operations or knowing how, but certainly being aware of what their challenges are, what's important for them. And then again, how can I and my team serve that team with the ultimate aim of serving the business?
it's always crazy not to invest in them and nurture them, really, which is brilliant. And did you find that with a smaller team, you had a lot more responsibility, but a lot more ability to act and make change?
Yes, I loved it. There's this freedom, like you said, freedom to act. And in bigger organizations, and for the right reasons in most cases, there are some very clear lines of operations, aren't there? Or almost silos sometimes in the way they end up operating sometimes. But in a smaller organization, there is definitely this ability to, I call it cross-pollinate, to almost cross-pollinate across many different functions. And, you know, your ideas are heard very quickly and you're able to make those connections in such a beautiful way.
Did you have to make any changes internationally for different cultures?
Yes, and that's I loved that. That was really new for me actually, because I understand different cultures just because of my background as a human being. But then in terms of in the workplace, I'd worked for UK-centric organizations and in retail, very similar in terms of the cultures. But this organization, just looking at and watching and finding out how different cultures operate. There are people are people, obviously, and people are individuals, but there are rules and there are norms that you can sort of observe as you're in different cultures. So yes, there were some tweaks and some amendments about our culture, but most of it was about service and what does the client need, what does the customer need, and those things which are transferable across any culture, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So where next?
Where next? Okay, so next, I have to think about it, you know, it's such a long time ago. So next I went into an organization which I will not name. I will not name them. I had my first daughter and the international role was brilliant. I was promoted a number of times and then ended up being in a role where there's a lot of travel. Which didn't quite work with the baby. So I moved to an organization and learnings from this as well, interestingly. The culture was awful. The culture was awful. There's no other way to describe it. HR team and the HR leader, another beautiful person. But if I go back to the original person I heard talks about who couldn't deliver bad news and wouldn't deliver bad news, this HR director was that in the extreme, in the complete extreme. In that, in the wider organizations, there was a lot of really bad behavior, bullying. It was just people showed up and almost like we're hiding. They would do the minimum, bare minimum, as to not get noticed. And then, I think it was awful. The turnover in the HR team was the worst in the whole organization, because people join the HR team, values-based people who understand HR, the power of leading your people in the right way. That was not what the organization was doing at all. And I'm not really one to necessarily sort of bail quickly. And I'll tend to try to have a kind, compassionate conversation, but an honest conversation as well. So I had a couple of conversations with the HR director around what I was seeing out in the organization, the behaviors that were being displayed, and also the impact that was having on leaders. You know, we had lots of leaders off ill, and usually, even in an organization with terrible absence records, it doesn't tend to be leaders and managers. But in this organization, it was stress and all sorts of things. And she just didn't understand. In her mind, she'd been in the organization for, I think, 25, 30 years. So she thought that was just the real world. She's like, oh, Aggie, this is just the real world. You'll get it. You'll understand. I was like, well, I have worked in other organizations and bigger organizations. And, you've seen my CV, you know I've come from. This is not the way to operate. And I'm not suggesting the other cultures were perfect. However, this is not the way to operate. And we're losing people. And look how much we're spending in recruiting and replacing them. So she wasn't listening. She wasn't hearing it. And she wasn't really willing to make a change. And I hadn't made the decision to change roles yet. I just was approached by someone about another organization, Tesco Stores Limited. So went for the interview, was successful, and then moved. But the learnings from the organization I left definitely were just around, sometimes if a place isn't right for you, it's okay to move. It's okay to move. I would say try, if you can, to have conversations, try to make an impact, try to change the situation if you can. But if it's not going to work, then there's nothing wrong with moving on to something else, which is what I did. And I loved my time in Tesco. Very interesting organization. And I'll say this, I don't think it's anything new, but it's one of those organizations where you either love it because you're also quite fast-paced, you are very intentional about what you're doing, or it's a bit too much for you and it doesn't work. So yeah, I think people tend to be in one camp or the other. I was in the former. And this was the first organization actually that really thought and talked about behaviors, feelings, which is really interesting. So the thing around feelings and how we feel in the workplace, and the impact that has on how we perform, a lot around our mindset as well, which again was really new. But I soak up all this kind of stuff, so I loved it. So yeah, really loved Tesco for many reasons. And then also there was a lot of structure around our behaviors. If you're at this level in the organization, these are the behaviors we expect from you. Technically, this is what we expect, but actually behaviors we expect. At this level, these are behaviors. This was all quite new for me based on my experience beforehand as well.
That's fascinating. And I have to ask, if the unnamed company before Tesco's, if that was the first place you'd worked in HR, how do you think things would have been different?
Gosh. See, I think if that was the first place I'd worked in HR, I don't know how different things would have been. I think I would have still been in a place where this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. This cannot be the way in which people are expected to behave. This cannot be the limit of my influence in terms of how people feel at work. And I say that because there's two reasons I say that. Because when I was growing up, and which I didn't say, which about saying now, when I was growing up, I remember sitting around the dinner table or just hearing the grown-ups, I was a child at the time, speaking about work. And a lot of the conversations were grumbles. People not feeling like they're being listened to, people with managers who weren't very polite. And in my mind, even as a child, I thought to myself, they're at work for most of the day. They're at work for so long. How can we make that workplace a nice place? Because that can't feel nice to be in this place where you're not listened to, you're not heard, someone's being rude to you. So I think for me, HR is almost vocational. So in my mind, there's always this, there's got to be better. We've got to be able to do better. This can't be the answer. So I think had be that place, almost said it, at that organization, been my first experience in HR, I think I'd have still been in a place where, no, this is not the answer. This can't be right. There's got to be better. We've got to do better. And if I can't do it here, I need to find somewhere else where I can.
Fabulous. You'd have definitely stuck with it and found a better place, I know. So, a wonderful time at Tesco. What happened to cause you to move on from there then?
Yes, so I had a couple of roles in Tesco, so moved around, got promoted and all that beautiful stuff. But I think the important thing to say is that it always depends on who's leading you at that particular time. And also sometimes you can grow out of a role and that next role for you isn't ready yet. So for me, it was a combination of both. I won't say too much about the leadership piece, but I went through a development program. So Tesco are great at, spotting talent and then putting them through development and then getting them ready for the next role. I was selected as someone who was awesome, which is great, as part of a group, went through a development program. Then I was ready for my next role. But then, as happens, the right role didn't come up. A couple came up, but they were abroad in different parts, had a young family, and then a couple came up with a bit of travel, but again with a young family that wasn't going to work. So I just got to a place where it was time to move on. Then I ended up in mother care. Loved my time in mother care. That was a maternity cover. But in mother care, what I found was almost like when I went to the airport retailer, where the silos of a big organization were no longer there. I had lots of influence. I was able to spot an issue, problem, gap, have those conversations at a strategic level around, what are we trying to achieve? How does it support the bottom line? And then how do we then engineer backwards and what the solution is? Brilliant. Loved it. And I had a leader who was super hardworking, expected a lot from her team, and some people thrived in that and others did not, and I thrived in that. And we still talk to this day. This was, God, how many years ago? About 10 years ago, I think it was. But we still talk, and she's still very much a huge supporter.
That's fascinating. And there is a saying that people don't leave an organisation, they leave their manager. You've mentioned the relationship between you and your boss several times. Do you think that's probably one of the most important relationships for managers in any organisation?
Definitely. I won't say it's 100% the reason why people stick or why people leave. It'll never be 100%, but it's a huge part. And I think especially in especially in larger organizations where you can move, you can have different experiences. I definitely know, if I think about Arcadia, if I think about Tesco as an example as well, I know that my experiences based on the leader I had at the time were very different, and how I felt about the organization at the time, those times as well, were very different as well.
Interesting. So where next then?
Next, so McDonald's after that. So interesting organization, really interesting. And what I found was, I think as a consumer, McDonald's seems very bright and shiny and doing different things, and, front edge and leading edge when it comes to marketing and all those beautiful things, which it absolutely is. When you join the organization, the really interesting thing is that the leadership style is quite traditional in certain ways, in a great way in terms of 100,000 people, however many restaurants, however many franchises, there has to be very clear ways of working to maintain that consistency. So it's beautiful in that respect. But also traditional values in terms of caring, which I don't know why. I wouldn't have expected it, but I didn't. I'm not sure why I didn't, but I didn't. And in the way that the organization has a huge charitable giving arm, and that's really important. Ronald McDonald House, and again, nothing I was aware of before I joined the organization. And then again, that piece around behaviors and values is really, really important in the organization.
Sounds like you found a bit of love there, which is your watchword.
Yes, it is. It is. So love in terms of, and this is where I'm going to come back to, it isn't always necessarily just the leader. So I think I had experienced this beautiful freedom to develop, freedom to strategize, and all these beautiful things in mother care. So coming back into a very structured way of working, and everyone's got their very clear lines of sight. Like I said, for great reasons, because of the size and sheer scale and consistency that you want to achieve. That piece didn't work for me anymore. So I loved lots of things, but there were some things that, little frustrations here and there. And I'm a very broad thinker. I'm not a silent thinker. So I'd look at something thinking, if only we could sort that bit out, then it would connect quite beautifully with everything else. But it's like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Stay in your lane.
So lots of beautiful things, but time to move on. So where after McDonald's then?
Then Argent Foods, which is an international organization, which is where we met. That's when we met. So again, back to big fish, small pond. That's where I love to be. Another beautiful organization. So the food industry, depending which parts, this is more the growing and the beginning part of the food chain. Quite traditional in lots of ways. If you're thinking about diversity and inclusion, not so much there yet. If we're thinking about leadership behaviors and how we show up, not quite there yet either. It's quite traditional. You rock up to work, you do your job, you get paid, and that's pretty much as far as the relationship goes. Not quite that really. It's a bit more than that, but it's almost on that end of the scale in the industry itself. But really lovely, beautiful, values-driven people. So the leaders in that organization, more so than the others that I'd come across, were definitely commercial. I'm not going to suggest they're not commercial at all, but that wasn't the first thing that they worried about. That wasn't the first conversation they'd lean into. A lot of that was around relationships, and you had so much longevity of service. You had suppliers that had almost grown up together with the organization over decades and things, which again is very different to what I've seen before, which was very, you're our supplier. This is what you need to provide. If you can't do that, we're going to get another one. here it was quite different. And that was really nice, actually. That's quite some learning for me as well, or definitely some insights that I took in and have sort of built into how I work. Again, back to those relationships and that beautiful respect and mutual respect both ways.
It's unusual to find a culture that is genuinely like that and values relationships with all the stakeholders as opposed to just being commercially focused. So very enjoyable time. So at that time, I'm guessing that's when your thoughts and vision for Mahogany came up.
Well, no, that isn't, interestingly. It isn't. So yeah, definitely that piece. I just want to come back to what you've just said around that genuine stakeholder piece. Really, really, really important. But I think what was missing from the people, which I brought in to the organizations from the people point of view, was then applying that strategic, intentional piece around the relationship with our people, and back to that bottom line. And how do we engage our people? And actually, that generational piece was really huge in that organization, because a lot of the leaders, because they grew up with the organization, some of them owned the different parts that they led. They'd been in that for 30, 40 years, and they tend to be a different generation. So in that generation, you did come to work, you got paid, and then you went home, and just helping them make those connections between, one, our generations are different. There's an expectation around well-being, there's an expectation around engagement, there's an expectation around growth, and things like that was really important for them. So I think in any culture, you can have the beautiful pieces, but other parts can still be missing. And then how do you weave that in? But back to your last question around when I started thinking about Mahogany, I actually started thinking about Mahogany. I wouldn't have called it that at the time. When I was in Tesco. And some of that was around looking at different management styles. And even within lots of huge structures, looking at how they operated and the impact that had. And I saw a bit of a need to support, help people make those connections, leaders make those connections between how you show up, who you are, and then the impact it has on your team. But equally, how you show up and who you are and how it has an impact on you. Actually, how can you show up as your true self? How can you show up as authentic you without having to wear I'm now a manager hat and then show up, or I'm now speaking to this person hat, and then, so there was that. So about 6 months ago, I found something in my loft, and it was a A3 piece of paper, so flip chart, there we go, a couple of flip chart sheets that I'd written when I was still in Tesco. And I had written 3 things that I wanted to do. There was no time frame. There were just ideas in my head. So one was to start a online shop selling black dolls for my. That's one. The other was to start a HR consultancy to support organizations and to support leaders as they develop their people. And then the third was to write a book. So the interesting thing is that when I found this, I had started my doll business, which I had for 6 years. And then I closed it off when I started Mahogany. Obviously, I've started Mahogany as well, so now I've just got to write the book. But it's something that I just written. I'd forgotten about it. I wrote it down and I sort of mapped it all out and had a little spider chart of the different things I'd be thinking about. And then it was in my loft. I was like, oh my goodness, I'd forgotten I'd done this. And yeah. So I thought about Mahogany actually a long time ago. In Argent, that is when I definitely said, right, let's look at this, let's do this. And there were lots of different reasons around that. One, which is probably a learning that people talk about often, is in my head, I thought I'd be super fulfilled. I would love my job once I became an HR director. This is a long time ago. Oh, when I get there, it'll be this. And when I get there, it'll be that. And it was a lot of those things, but not all of those things for me. I still didn't feel that sense of huge fulfillment. And then also what I recognize about myself as well is that I love a challenge. I love newness. I love knowing I can make an impact. And therefore, that's probably why actually I was promoted so quickly in lots of different roles. When I looked back, I'd never done a single role for more than 2 years. Never have, because I always then progress to the next one or get promoted or whatever that may be. Whereas in this role, this was the longest I've been in a role as well. So I started finding myself thinking, what can I do next? And how can I build on that? I'm a coach as well. I haven't mentioned that. I also ended up coaching a lot of senior leaders. And when we talked about issues such as diversity and inclusion, or there was this huge reticence of leaders to engage in the conversation. And the reason for that is that they felt their identity as white men, which most of them were, meant that either diversity and inclusion wasn't about them, or they felt as though they couldn't engage because they didn't want to say the wrong thing, upset someone, be seen as a sexist or a homophobe or someone who's racist by saying the wrong thing. So because of those reasons, they disengaged. Now, with any change, and especially societal change, which is what we're talking about when it comes to discrimination and, diversity and inclusion, you need everybody involved, right? You need every single person involved. And actually, diversity and inclusion is about everyone. It's about everyone feeling that they have a voice. It's about everyone feeling that they have the opportunity to thrive in an organization. And then also, if you don't have your leaders on board in organizations, that change is not going to happen in the right way, and it's not going to happen in a sustainable way either. Change can still happen, but without your leaders on board, it's not going to happen. And then I sort of understood also where they were coming from, in that the way the conversations sometimes had, you can see why people might want to step back from it. You can see why it feels like people are pointing fingers. So I thought, there's definitely some support that I can give there. Also, in terms of HR as a profession, being able to make those connections between the business's why and why the organization exists in the first place, and how that connects to what we do as a people function, we're not always very good at yet. I want to say yet because I'm hopeful. We're not always that strong at that, are we? So I felt like there's some support I can do around that, and then making that link with diversity and inclusion. And then also my own lived experience, sort of growing up in the UK as a Black child, growing in my career. I've not mentioned some of the interesting experiences, but growing up in my career as a Black person as well, there was definitely experiences that I've had that I sort of vowed, and still continue to this day, want to ensure that they don't happen to other people, regardless of their identity. So I guess those three things: my experience, my lived experience, my desire to support leaders and to make the conversation safe so they can take action, and then my knowledge of HR and how that operates, came together with the idea around Mahogany Inclusion Partners.
And are you now fulfilled?
Definitely. I feel so blessed. I feel so blessed in doing what I do on a daily basis. The purpose of Mahogany Inclusion Partners is to make the world a more inclusive place. And how we do that is around supporting organizations to create cultures where everybody can thrive. Everybody has the opportunity to thrive, and making the conversation safe as well. It's not a lovely conversation to have necessarily. I'd love to not have to speak about this. I'd love to be thinking about something else, because can't we just be nice to each other, intentionally good to each other, and, treat people right. But the fact that we're able to do it in a way that people are engaging, leaders are engaging, is so beautiful. And it has this ripple effect as well, because I often hear leaders saying, we had this conversation, even if it's about race, as an example, you've helped me understand some things that I didn't understand before, but guess what? I was at the dinner table speaking to my wife, or I was at the dinner table speaking to my family, and we're now having these conversations and we're now expanding our understanding. It's such a beautiful thing.
That must be very rewarding, because you're going beyond the workplace and you're enabling people to be more confident and get involved, as opposed to shy away from it. So that must be one of the biggest rewards on top of everything else that you get out of it.
It really is. And giving people that confidence, and it's such a human thing. It's even outside of the workplace. It's just us as humans. We're all amazing. We're all beautiful, and difference is a beautiful thing. We don't have to run away from it. And it's amazing. I don't even know how to describe it. It's amazing.
And again, if we look back then at some of those less than pleasant experiences, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think that the advice would be you. You're perfectly imperfect as you are. And things that would run through my mind at the time, I'd probably just reiterate some of that. I'm a Christian, I'm a woman of faith. So I used to always say to myself, Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. And like, I try not to get angry about it. And just believe in myself as well, because there were things that were said to me in my career, such as you can see, I have Afro hair. That's the way my hair grows, because that's how it grows naturally. But I was told on a number of occasions by two different leaders in two different organizations, HR leaders, by the way, that I was great at my job. I was really good at what I was doing, and I was meeting all the parameters I had to meet. The only thing was I just didn't look very professional. So they suggested that I straighten my hair. Yeah, relax your straighten your hair, and then you'll be seen as more professional. So it didn't matter that I was delivering. It didn't matter that I had great relationships. The one thing that they had an issue with my hair, which is naturally like this, and a few other things that were said. And yeah, so I think the thing would be, one, not to take it personally, as crazy as it sounds, because it is personal, but then also just to keep believing in who you are and be who you are, be your authentic you. Because for a period of time, I did straighten my hair, which wasn't great for my scalp. I've got sensitive scalp, all these things. And then equally, there was a time when I did try to act in a different way, because I'm very open, I'm very extrovert, and all these things. That's just who I am. And as you can see, I move my hands around a lot when I speak. But there were moments where I was trying not to do that, to dim that down a little bit and calm it down a little bit. But it just took too much energy to do that. And then I couldn't perform as me because I wasn't being me. So
it's hard work to try and be somebody else. How have things changed then since then?
I think things have changed for the better. I'm not going to say 100%, because clearly we're not there yet. But I think, one, we're able to have better conversations, which we didn't before. And I think a lot of that was the pandemic, which was horrible in many ways for many people. What it also did do is it gave the human race, I suppose, almost a common enemy. It's a challenge for all of us. And it kind of humanized a lot of how we saw each other and how we behaved. Even in organizations, you saw leaders talking more about their people and well-being in a way that they hadn't before. And then when the murder of George Floyd happened, I think people were ready, I guess, to look at it as a human issue. So I think moments like that, so the pandemic and then the murder of George Floyd, have definitely changed things in that we're having conversations, we're taking action. There's still work to do.
Mm. And there probably always will be.
Yes, I mean, I hope not. I pray for the day, as odd as it sounds, where my role no longer exists, where we don't need to talk about diversity and inclusion because we're just doing the right thing. And if someone's great at their job, brilliant. If they're not good at their job, then they're not. We can either help them in their job to support them to get better, or we can help them to find something that they are going to be good at. And that's all that factors, not someone's gender, not someone's sexuality, not, anything like that.
Now, you've seen a lot of managers, have read a lot, know a lot. What would you say the characteristics of a really good manager are?
I think a really good manager understands, and I'm going to use the word which you don't hear in business very often, but understands love. I'm going to use that word because that's the word I use. I don't know if you can see it. You can probably see it behind me. That's my word, and it can mean different things. And for me, love and kindness, we can call it kindness at work if it feels a bit more comfortable for people. But kindness at work is caring about people, caring about the people who work for you and that you're leading. It doesn't mean being involved in their lives and everything else, unless they really want you to be. But it's really about, these are human beings who have feelings, who have emotions, who have desires, and really connecting with that. At the same time, connecting with your why as a leader. Why am I a leader? What does it matter to me? And, who am I as a leader? And then also connecting with the why of the organization. So there's three things, I guess, around that. The why of the organization, the why of my department, and therefore the why of this person's role. So we've got clarity around that. And then it's around, how do I help this person deliver that why of that role? And that's my role as a leader, to help them do that. And helping them do that includes setting the stage in terms of, here are the expectations of the role, here's what we need from the role, and here are the outcomes, here's how I'll support you. But actually, let's have a really good two-way conversation around what do you need? What additional stuff do you need from me? Do you need from the organization? But also some ownership. What are you going to do to ensure that you deliver the why? When people aren't delivering, you're not being mean, you're not being horrible, you don't get HR to do it for you. You have that conversation around, we talked about the expectations. How do you think you're doing? Because you want to hear from them as well. Here's how I think you're doing. Now together, how do we plug that gap for you? How do we fix it for you?
Do you think good people managers are born or skilled?
I think skilled. I think, yes, there are some people, and we know that, don't we? We have different preferences, we have different abilities. There are some people who are naturally great in terms of talking to people and being engaging, etc. Often, though, we can assume they're good leaders, but they're probably good leaders when things are great. But often those people aren't great leaders when things aren't going so well. And I'll speak to myself in that I love positive conversations, etc. But I don't love the conversations that aren't so positive. I've learned very quickly that actually it's kinder to let someone know that they're not where we want them to be at that point in time. It's kinder to have that conversation with them in a compassionate way. It's kinder to help them. There's certain characteristics that maybe are more aligned with engaging leadership and everything else, but actually it's a skill you develop.
I think it's a great point that it's easier to be a great leader when everything's going perfectly, but when it gets tough, that's when you have to step up. Tell us your recommendations for books, people, websites. Where do you go to keep up to date, and what's your real must-reads?
My list is not really necessarily a typical leadership. My list tends to be more around us as humans, understanding who we are, how we operate, and some commonalities around human beings as well, but also understanding ourselves as well and how we operate. So the first book that I listed was a lady called Iyanla Vanzant, and her book is around forgiveness. And the reason I picked that book, and I sort of leaned into that book, is from a relationship. Remember, I talked about relationships, and that's the really important piece around how you relate with your people in your team, how you relate with your suppliers, leaders, colleagues, etc. And that piece around forgiveness is really important. And if you think to what I said earlier around when I did experience discrimination, the thing that kept me from I guess maybe getting really upset or getting really angry was, forgive them, Father, they don't know what they do. And so I think that piece is really important. People will annoy you. People will upset you. Most of the time unintentionally. They're just busy thinking about their own thing and they think they're doing the right thing for them. Sometimes intentionally, who knows, but that piece around forgiveness. And then we've got, this is a leadership book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick M. Lencioni. This book I read in one afternoon, a really easy read, a really brilliant way of sort of talking about issues that can occur in a team and then what you can do about them. And it's told in a story. There's a leadership team that go on a retreat, etc., etc. Brilliant read and really, really easy as well. And then we have the 7-level framework for mastery in life and in business. So in life and in business. And it's called Energy Leadership, Bruce Schneider. And this is another book that's told as a story. And it's about our own mindsets and where we are. There are 7 different levels I'm not going to go through right now. But they start with feeling like a victim and your mindset around that. Everything's everybody else's fault. You can't fix anything. The world is doomed. My situation's doomed. That kind of thinking that, we can all find ourselves in those places sometimes, depending what's happening. But then the impact that has on those around you. But it also helps you recognize others that may be in that mindset and then how you can help them get to hopefully level 7. Then we have, this one's quite funny, this author called Lovey Ajay Jones, and her book is called The Fear Fighter Manual. And this is about being authentically you and speaking your mind in a respectful way. So none of these are in any kind of an antagonistic way, but in a respectful way, but being clear about who you are as a person and how you show up in the world. And also that bit around, even if you think people are being unkind or mean or whatever it may be, or unhelpful, most of the time it's not about you. It's about them and what's happening for them. So I love that book. And then there's Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering. Now, this is brilliant in terms of meetings and when you're getting together with people, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's actually, I don't know, dinner parties at home, what that may be, and how you can really be intentional about how you spend time with people. Time is a precious resource, so how can you be intentional about how you spend time with people and why they're showing up to your meeting and how you can make that great. So that's the books. And then where I go for information, the first one is business related. So Harvard Business Review, they have everything about everything all the time, which is brilliant, which is absolutely brilliant. You can dip in as and when you need to. You can get that specialist deep knowledge as well. The rest are coaches. So a woman called Lisa Nichols, and I signed up for one of her courses, I think about 5 years ago, which is really interesting. It's about Speak to Inspire, and it's about how you use your voice and how you show up authentically. Common theme, authentic in my stuff, about how you show up authentically, which is brilliant. So I definitely suggest her. Another coach and speaker, Mel Robbins, and she's very much about empowering people to make things happen, being intentional. She has this 5-second thing that she does around if you really don't want to do something and you want to just get yourself to do it, just count down to 5 if you really want to do it, and then just do it. And I often use it in the morning when I'm going to the gym. I'm like, no, I don't want to go to the gym. I don't. I'll just go, okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then go. Off I go. So that's Mel. Jay Shetty, another coach. And he's great in terms of, he loves love, talks about love, relationships, but also how we choose to show up as well. So again, another common theme you'll see around that. So for me, relationships, and so that's where I tend to go and then apply all of that knowledge to how I lead and how I show up as well.
Brilliant. I'm definitely going to use the 5, see if that helps me get stuff done. That's great. Aggie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for some fabulous recommendations, and above all, for bringing some love to the podcast. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks for listening to the Managing People podcast. I hope you found it informative and useful. All the information mentioned is in the notes on the podcast page, and I hope you check out the other episodes. See you next time.